I've worked the graveyard shift at a water treatment plant on the north side of St. Louis for about 6 years, and until October of 2022, the strangest thing I'd ever pulled out of a settling tank was a set of dentures. The plant sits just off the Mississippi, tucked behind a stretch of levee where nobody walks after dark. Most nights it's me, a guy named Reggie 2 buildings over on the pump side, and the sound of the river doing whatever the river does. October means the air off the water starts smelling different. Colder, a little like wet iron. You get used to it. My job that shift was routine. Every couple weeks, we run what's called a solids check on the primary clarifiers, which is a fancy way of saying you scrape the crud off the intake screens and log what you find. Most of it is exactly what you'd expect. Leaves, cigarette butts, the occasional dead fish. Now and then, somebody's fishing lure. Once a rubber duck, which I kept on my desk for a year. I clocked in at 10. Poured coffee out of the pot Reggie makes too strong on purpose. Did my walk around, checked the SCADA screens, everything green. Around midnight, I pulled on my waders and my headlamp and went down to Clarifier 2. The catwalk over 2 runs about 8 feet above the water line, and the water down there isn't really water yet. It's still gray, still moving, still got things floating in it that haven't been screened out. You lean over with a long-handled rake and you drag the surface. Normal stuff came up first: a plastic bag, half a styrofoam cup, something that used to be a shoe. I bagged it all and marked the log. Then the rake caught on something heavier. I dragged it toward the edge and hooked it up. It was a small pouch about the size of a paperback book, clear plastic on one side, black rubber trim, one of those waterproof cases people buy for kayaking or the beach. It was closed, the seal was tight, and through the clear side, I could see what looked like a passport. I'm going to be honest, my first thought wasn't anything creepy. My first thought was that some idiot dropped their vacation stuff off a bridge, and I was about to have a fun story for Reggie. I carried the pouch back up to the shed, set it on the metal table under the fluorescent light, and popped the seal. Inside, everything was dry. Completely dry. Passport, a debit card from a credit union I didn't recognize, and a folded piece of paper that turned out to be a medical card. Blood type, an allergy note, an emergency contact. All 3 items had the same name on them. I'm not going to give the whole name here, but the first name was Dale. I remember thinking it was strange that all his stuff was in one bag and none of it was cash. No wallet, no phone, just the things you'd need if somebody had to identify you. That's when the back of my neck started to feel wrong. I don't know how to describe it, except that the shed suddenly felt very small. I put everything back in the pouch, sealed it, and walked over to the office to use the desktop. I don't know exactly why I did what I did next. Reggie says it's because I watch too much true crime. Maybe. I typed the name into a general search along with the word Missouri. The first result was from a local news station posted the day before. A man named Dale, 41, last seen leaving a bar in South City around 11 the previous night. Family filed a report that morning. Photo attached. Same face as the passport. I sat there for a minute with my hand on the mouse. I called the non-emergency line first because I didn't want to be the guy who dials 911 over a lost passport. I explained where I worked, what I'd pulled out of the tank, and whose name was on it. The dispatcher was quiet for a second, then said someone would be there in 15 minutes. 2 detectives showed up in under 10. They were nice about it, but they were fast. Gloves on before they touched the pouch. Photos of the table, the pouch, the shed, the catwalk. One of them asked me to walk him down to Clarifier 2 and show him exactly where the rake had caught. I did. He stood on the catwalk for a long time with his flashlight moving across the surface of the water, and he didn't say anything. Then he asked me what was upstream of the intake. I told him. The intake pulls from a channel that runs off the main river about 2 miles north. Anything in our clarifier came in from the river through that channel and then through 2 sets of bar screens before it got to me. He wrote that down. They took the pouch. They took my statement. They told me to expect a follow-up call and not to talk about it, which I didn't until now. Here's the part that's going to sound like a letdown, and I promise I'm telling it straight. 6 hours later, around 8 in the morning, Dale walked out of the river, not near the plant, about 3 kilometers downstream on the Illinois side, near a boat ramp where a guy was launching for early bass. Dale was soaked, hypothermic, missing one shoe, but he was walking. He told the EMTs and later the detectives that he'd been on a bridge, that he'd leaned too far over the rail looking at something, that he'd fallen. He said he remembered the cold and then long stretches of nothing and then crawling up the bank. He said he'd lost his documents in the water when he hit. The math was fine. That's what the follow-up detective told me when he finally called, about a week later. He was polite about it. He said the current speed that night, the distance from the bridge to our intake, the distance from the bridge to the boat ramp, all of it lined up. A man could fall off that bridge, lose a waterproof pouch out of his jacket, get carried downstream, and end up on that ramp in the window he described. Nothing about the timeline broke. I said that made sense. I thanked him. I didn't ask the question I wanted to ask because I'd already asked it a dozen times in my own head, and I knew he didn't have an answer. The pouch was intact when I pulled it out. I want to be very clear about that. The seal wasn't broken. The rubber trim wasn't torn. The clear plastic didn't have a scratch on it, and the pouch was maybe 4 inches across at its widest point. The bar screens on our intake, the ones every piece of debris from that channel has to pass through before it reaches the clarifier, are set to a 2-inch gap. There are 2 of them, staggered. I've cleaned them 1,000 times. Nothing that pouch's size gets through them without folding or tearing. Nothing. I asked the day shift supervisor about it, casually, a couple weeks after. I said, hypothetically, could something that size make it past both screens intact? He thought about it, said, maybe if it came through end on and the current was strong enough, but even then the second screen would almost certainly catch it. He asked why. I said I was just curious. I could tell he didn't believe me. I still work the graveyard shift. I still do the solids check on clarifier 2 every 2 weeks. I've pulled a lot of stuff out since then. Leaves, cups, a wedding ring once, which was its own thing. Nothing else like the pouch. Dale, from what I understand, recovered fine, went home. I've never met him, and I don't want to. I don't have a big ending for this. I'm not going to tell you it changed my life, or that I hear things by the water now. I don't. The river sounds like the river. I just think, sometimes, about that pouch sitting dry on the table under the fluorescent light, and about the fact that whatever route it took to get to me, it wasn't the one that made sense. I've been doing elevator maintenance in Chicago for about 11 years. Otis, Cone, Schindler, doesn't matter. If it moves people up and down and has a control panel, I can pull the guts apart and put them back together. Most of the job is boring. That's what I like about it. You show up, you check the hoist ropes, you clean the sheave, you run diagnostics, you eat a sandwich in the machine room, you go home. The building I want to talk about is on the north side, off LaSalle. 41 floors, mostly 1-bedrooms and studios, the kind of place where people move in for a year and then vanish. I won't say the exact address for reasons that'll be obvious. Let's call it the Kellwood. That's not the real name, either. I got put on their quarterly in February 2022. Cold week. That kind of Chicago cold where your fingers stop working through the gloves and the wind off the river cuts sideways down every block. I remember because I had to keep the van running in the loading zone, or the diagnostic laptop wouldn't stay warm enough to boot. The building has 2 passenger cars and 1 service car, standard setup. My checklist that morning was routine. I went up to the machine room on 42, ran the mechanical checks, everything within spec. Then I sat down with the laptop and puled the call logs, every modern elevator logs, every button press. Floor requested, time down to the second, car response, door open, door close, weight sensor reading. It's mostly for maintenance, figuring out wear patterns, but management sometimes uses it too. Some buildings pull the logs when there's a complaint. Mostly, nobody looks at them. I look at them. It's part of my process. You catch weird stuff early. A door reopening 100 times a day means the safety edge is going. A car sitting on one floor for hours means the call button is stuck. Small tells. I was scrolling through car A when I noticed the pattern. Every night, between roughly 3:10 and 3:50 in the morning, the car got called down from the 32nd floor. Not once, 7, sometimes 8 times in a row. It would go from 32 to the lobby, sit there 10 seconds with the doors open, close, and get called back up to 32. Then, a minute or two later, again, same loop. I figured it was a bad button, sticky contact, moisture, kids messing around, whatever. I flagged it, made a note to check the panel on 32, kept scrolling. Then I noticed it was happening every night. I mean every single night. I pulled the log back a week. Same thing. 2 weeks. Same thing. I pulled it back as far as the system stored, which turned out to be about 5 months. Every night since late September, between 3 and 4 a.m., that car had done its little dance. A sticky button doesn't do that. A sticky button gets pressed once and stays pressed, or it fires off cals at random hours. This was clockwork, and it wasn't the button either, because the log distinguishes between hall calls and car calls. Hall calls were coming from the 32nd floor hallway button, but the car calls to lobby were coming from inside the cab. Somebody was riding it. Okay, I told myself. Somebody with insomnia. Somebody who works nights and does the same shift every day and rides the elevator to smoke outside or grab something from their car. Weird, but people are weird. That's Chicago, except nobody rides an elevator 7 times in a row. I went up to 32 to check the panel anyway. The 32nd floor has 3 units, 32A, 32B, 32C. The panel was fine. I stood in the hallway for a minute, just listening. Carpet, that flat, fluorescent hum, a TV muffled behind one of the doors. Nothing unusual. On my way back down, I asked the building manager, a woman named Renata, who's been running the place forever, about the units. 32A's a young couple, both work in finance, she said. 32B is a retired teacher, been here 12 years. 32C is empty. Owner lives in Arizona, keeps it as an investment, hasn't been rented since summer. I asked when in summer. August. Guy moved out in August, didn't renew. 5 months ago. Give or take. I told Renata I wanted to check the wiring in 32C just to rule out a short. She got me the key. The unit was clean. Furniture staged like a real estate listing. That fake, lived-in look. Bowl of plastic apples on the counter. The air smelled like dust and something else, something faint, like cologne that had been in a closed room too long. I noticed the deadbolt when I locked up. It didn't quite catch on the first turn. I looked at the strike plate. Fine. I looked at the cylinder. Fine. From the outside. But when I put the key back in and turned it slow, one of the pins gave in a way pins don't usually give. Worked. Rounded off. I've picked a couple of locks in my life. Every technician has. You get locked out of a machine room, you learn. That cylinder had been picked more than once, maybe a lot more than once. I didn't say anything to Renata. I told her I'd need to come back with a part. That night, I did something I want to be clear about. I did not call the police. I should have. I know that now. What I did instead was drive back to the Kellwood around 1 in the morning with a small motion sensor from my personal kit, the kind we use to test door timing, and I mounted it inside the ceiling panel of car A. It logs presence. Anything over about 40 pounds standing under it triggers a timestamp. I paired it to my phone and went home to bed. I woke up at 6 a.m. and checked. Between 3:14 and 3:47, the sensor had triggered 11 times. Every ride the car made, top to bottom, somebody had been standing under that sensor. The weight readings from the elevator's own load cell backed it up. One person, roughly 180 to 200 pounds, riding the loop. I called Renata, then I called the police. What they pieced together over the next 2 weeks, I got in fragments, some from Renata, some from a detective who was decent enough to answer a few of my questions after the fact. 32C wasn't empty at night. Somebody had been letting himself in through the picked deadbolt for months. He wasn't sleeping there. He was using it. The unit had a second bedroom with a mattress on the floor that wasn't in the staging photos. The mattress was newer than the rest of the furniture. There were prints on it. There were prints on the kitchen counter, on the bathroom faucet, and on the elevator call button on 32. The lab pulled DNA off the elevator handrail too. Skin cells, hair. The DNA came back to a guy wanted in Missouri. I won't say for what. It wasn't a nice thing. He'd been living under a different name in a suburb about 20 minutes from the Kellwood, working a day job, going home to a girlfriend who had no idea. The apartment on 32 was, as far as the detective could tell me, his second life. Where he brought people, where he did whatever he did. The elevator part is the piece I keep coming back to. He'd figured out that the service door at the back of the lobby, the one that opens into the alley, could be pushed open from the inside without triggering the alarm if you did it fast enough. Any night he needed to leave the building without being seen from the front entrance, he'd ride car A down, check the lobby camera angles from inside the cab, and if anything looked off, he'd send the car back up and try again in a few minutes. 7, 8 tries some nights. The loop I saw in the logs wasn't a malfunction. It was him deciding over and over whether it was safe to walk out. He was arrested at his day job in April. I don't work the Kellwood anymore. I asked to be rotated off. The thing that bothers me isn't him. The thing that bothers me is that his log went back 5 months and nobody noticed. Not the manager, not the residents, not me until February. He rode that elevator down about 1,400 times in the middle of the night in a building with 280 people sleeping in it, and the only reason anyone caught it was because I got bored and scrolled through a spreadsheet. I still pull the logs first thing, every building, every visit. Some habits you don't get to unlearn. I've worked palliative care for 11 years, mostly in Austin, and by now I've made peace with most of what happens in those rooms. People say things at the end. They see people who aren't there. They talk to their mother, their brother, a dog they had when they were 9. It's normal. We're taught not to correct them, so what I'm about to tell you shouldn't have shaken me the way it did. I've been sitting on this for a while, and I still don't really know what to do with it. This was March 2022. The center is off Mopac, one of those low brick buildings with a courtyard in the middle where nobody ever sits because the fountain's been broken since forever. I was on the 6 to 6 night shift that week. 14 patients on my floor, most of them past the point of talking. Room 208 was a man named Harold, 81, lung cancer, no family visits in the 6 weeks he'd been with us. He had a son somewhere in Oregon who called once, spoke to the charge nurse for maybe 2 minutes, and never called again. Harold had been on comfort care the whole time I knew him. He used to talk a little in the first couple weeks, little things. Asked me once if the coffee in the break room was any good. Told me he used to drive a truck route through New Mexico in the 70s, that kind of thing. Then about a week before the night I'm telling you about, he just stopped, not in a dramatic way. He didn't refuse to speak. He just went quiet, ate his applesauce when we brought it, drank water through a straw, watched the ceiling. When you asked him something, he'd blink at you, sometimes nod, but nothing came out of his mouth. The doctor said it was normal for that stage. Body pulling inward, conserving. I'd stopped expecting anything from him. That night, I was doing the 10 o'clock rounds. Nothing unusual. Hallway smelled like the lemon cleaner they use on the floors, and underneath that, the smell you get in those places that I don't really know how to describe to anyone who hasn't worked in one. Old bed sheets and lotion and something else that's just people. Not bad, just there. I knocked, said his name, pushed the door open. His lamp was on, the little yellow one clipped to the side table, the one I'd turned off myself at 8 when I brought his last cup of water. He was sitting up, not propped up, sitting up, on his own. His hands were flat on the blanket in front of him, and his back was off the pillows, and he was looking at the corner of the room, the corner to the left of the window, where the wall meets the closet door. Nothing there, a little smudge on the paint maybe, from where a chair back had hit it once, but nothing. He didn't turn when I came in. I stood in the doorway for a second because I honestly wasn't sure what I was seeing. A man who hadn't lifted his own head in 5 days was sitting upright and staring at a corner. I said, "Harold, hey, how are we doing?" He didn't move. His eyes stayed on the corner. I walked around to the side of the bed. I remember the little clicking sound my sneakers made on the linoleum. I remember thinking I needed to write this up, that the family would need to know he'd had a lucid stretch, that maybe I should get the on-call doctor. I put my hand on the bed rail. "Harold, can you hear me?" He spoke, very quiet, almost like he didn't want to scare something off. He said, "She's beautiful, your mother." I want to explain what that did to me, but I'm not sure I can. My mom died in November of 2020, pancreatic. She was 63. Harold had never met her. Harold didn't know my last name. He didn't know I had a mother living or dead. We didn't have those conversations. I don't keep a photo of her at the nurse's station. I don't wear anything of hers to work. There was nothing in that room, or on me, that pointed to her. I said something. I don't remember what. I think I said, "What?" but quiet, like a question you ask when you already heard the answer. He didn't repeat it. He didn't look at me. He kept looking at that corner, and his mouth stayed a little open, like he was waiting to hear something back. I did my job. That's the part I keep coming back to. I did exactly what I was trained to do. I checked his pulse. I checked his oxygen. I looked at the drip. His numbers were fine. Better than fine, honestly. Heart rate steadier than it had been in days. I wrote none of this down yet. I told him I was going to step out for a minute, and I'd be right back. He didn't answer. I went into the hallway, and I closed the door behind me, and I stood there. I don't know for how long. Long enough that another nurse, Preeti, came around the corner from the med room and asked if I was okay. I told her I was fine. She looked at me for a second longer than she need to, and then kept walking. I remember the wheels of her cart squeaking. One of them always squeaked. We used to joke about it. I stood there, and I thought about my mom. I thought about the last time I saw her, in the hospice down in San Antonio, and how she'd looked at the wall behind me and smiled at something, and I'd turned around, and there was nothing. And I'd told my sister about it later, and my sister had said, "That's just what people do at the end. That's just the brain." And I'd agreed with her because I wanted to agree with her. I went back into the room. He was lying down, eyes closed, blanket pulled up the way I'd left it at 8, breathing shallow and even, like he'd never sat up at all. The lamp was still on. I turned it off. He died at 4:20 in the morning. I wasn't in the room. The monitor at the desk went off, and by the time I got down the hall, he was gone. Peaceful. That's the word we use on the paperwork, and it was true this time. His face looked like nothing had happened to him at all. I didn't tell anyone at work, not Preeti, not the charge nurse, not the doctor who came to sign off. I wrote up my notes for the night, and I drove home, and I sat in my car in the parking lot of my apartment building until the sun came up over the roof of the building across the street. I called my sister that afternoon. She lives in Denver. I told her the whole thing, start to finish, the way I've told you now. She didn't say anything for a long time, long enough that I checked the screen to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Then she said, That's good, right?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah, it's good." We didn't talk about it again. I don't really know what I believe about what happened in that room. I've had 2 years to decide, and I still haven't. Some nights, I think Harold was seeing something the way all of them see something at the end, and my mom just happened to be the shape it took, and none of it means anything. Other nights, I think about the way he said it. Quiet, like he was already halfway wherever he was going, and he'd stopped to tell me something on the way. I don't know. I'm going to bed.